Namaste, everybody. Lisa Money here, the Breakthrough Life Coach. And I want to talk about a topic that I think is really, really important and is probably not spoken about as much as we probably should. So here we go. I'm talking about what we do when we have been severely abused in childhood and we are not acknowledging the trauma, and we are unaware that in our adult lives, we exchange money, sometimes our bodies, and sometimes services, and we extend ourselves to other people in exchange for contact, in exchange for conversation, in exchange for some sense of connection. So I'm talking about men and women who love too much, men and women, and even children. But those of us who feel so unworthy at our core and suffer with such shame at our core that we subconsciously and consciously, well, more subconsciously, do not believe that we're enough. And because we don't believe that we're enough, our brain then decides that we must give or do something in exchange for the relationships that we are having. So, for instance, you can be a female who feels so unloved and unworthy at her core because of childhood trauma, because dad was an alcoholic or mom was an alcoholic, or you were physically abused or sexually abused as a child, or you were just completely emotionally ignored, right? And so we have to understand that being emotionally ignored causes the same type of trauma in a child's brain as other forms of abuse. So we have to understand that being emotionally ignored is traumatizing. So you can come from a house, mom and dad are doctors and you've got the white picket fence, but if no one's attuning themselves to you and the message you're receiving is that you are invisible, you are not enough, then your little brain associates your feelings with yourself, right? And when your feelings are being ignored, you get the sense that you are unworthy, right? So attunement is very important. So when you are someone who comes from that type of an experience, you become an adult then with this background noise, I'm not enough, I'm not enough. And you really don't believe that you are. And you settle for less than you deserve. And you cling to relationships that are abusive, that are toxic. And probably the worst thing that happens is that you attract people who are totally okay with using you for sex. They are totally okay that they are using you for money. They are totally okay that they are isolating you from your friends. They are totally okay that they are putting you down and getting you to believe that it's your fault that you have any issues in the relationship whatsoever. There is a certain type of person that is unable to take accountability for how they show up in a relationship and how their lack of consideration for other people makes other people feel. People like that do exist. So it's important that those of us, we have to acknowledge those of us who have come from less than perfect homes. We have to know and acknowledge that we are prime candidates for people who lack empathy, for people who are exploitive, for people who are more on the narcissistic spectrum. We are prime targets for people who are okay with taking advantage and exploiting other people. It's important that abused adult children from dysfunctional homes acknowledge that, right? Because we don't know and we don't value, because no one's taught us that our feelings are valuable, right? We don't know that we deserve better. We don't know. we are legitimately confused, and we are legitimately under the impression that there's something wrong with us, and that good, healthy relationships belong to other people. They can't possibly be meant for us. We're eternally flawed. There must be something wrong with us, so I should settle for what shows up. And so it's very easy to confuse an abused adult child from a dysfunctional home. Very, very easy. But there are signs that you have to look out for. And I think the identifying ourselves as someone who has come from a dysfunctional home has got to be number one. You've got to recognize that you're a prime candidate, right? Now, some people struggle with that because they're like, but, my mother wasn't burning cigarettes into my arms. It's not about what happened to you, because a lot of trauma is about the perception. In other words, like the younger we were when we experienced a trauma. So you could be a month old, you can be 2 weeks old and suffer the rest of your life from the instability and the dysregulation that you experienced when you were 2 months old, when the brain was highly active and was under a state of evolution. And all of the systems associated with the fight or flight response were very delicate and being created. So you have to understand that our trauma, it's yes, the event matters, absolutely. But there's so many other factors that also go into trauma, PTSD, and complex PTSD, right? Complex PTSD means that you were living in a traumatic situation and there was no way out, and it was consistent, and it was day to day, and there was no way to escape, right? So that's where the term complex PTSD comes from. Now, it's important that we understand, as people who have come from dysfunctional homes, we're not playing the victim when we say, my mother was an alcoholic. My father beat me and she never said anything, or my father beat me and my mother was codependent and she never said anything. I felt completely powerless in my home. My uncles were alcoholics and the one was abusing me, and my mother acted like she didn't hear me tell her that I was being abused. Like, this happens. This is going on right now in the world with people right now. It's just awful. It's god awful. So it's important that we recognize, those of us who are out of those circumstances, or maybe even in those circumstances, you are not playing the victim when you say, I have been victimized and this is what's happened to me. I'm not a religious person. I say it all the time. But, I always say that I'll take wisdom from a rock or a tree, and you can gain a lot of wisdom from rocks and trees, let me tell you. So, the story about Christ when he's hanging on the cross, Christ screams out, Father, why have you forsaken me? No one ever pointed the finger at Jesus and said, hey, Jesus, you're playing the victim. No one ever said that, because it was obvious that Jesus Christ was being persecuted, right? And he was being killed. He was being murdered. It was understood. But then shortly after, the story goes that Christ said, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. But that came after Christ accepted that there was some victimization going on here, right? So it's important that we recognize when we have been victimized. And it's important that we understand that in recognizing that we have been victimized, the goal is not to get stuck on the cross. The goal is to move forward and be liberated and freed from the experience, right? That's the goal. And so life is a classroom, and experiences are for our benefit, and they help our minds evolve. And eventually we get to a point where we reach a higher state of consciousness. I call it level 3 consciousness, where we acknowledge our lower consciousnesses, lower aspects of self, the unevolved aspects of self, or the unawakened self. And we get to this point where we recognize that we have a higher self, and that these are experiences, and they're meant so I can overcome them, right? And I don't have to be nailed to them anymore. I can be free of them. That's a journey. It's a process. But it's important that we recognize that we have been victimized, right? And then it's important to understand that there's a particular type of person that is drawn to a victim of emotional, psychological, narcissistic abuse. They're drawn to those people because they're already confused, right? We're already unsure of ourselves. And on top of it, we're so wounded, all we want is love and connection. We want to feel like we're finally part of a tribe. So it's intoxicating to have someone be attracted to us and then compliment us and make us feel seen. It's almost impossible not to take the bait. It's almost impossible when you've been so wounded. But I want to speak to those of us who have, and I know that I'm guilty of it. I never thought that I was good enough. And the more alone I felt, that seemed to up the ante. So the more alone I felt, the more abandoned I felt, the more confused I felt, the more afraid I felt, the more of myself, mind, body, and soul, my actions, my deeds, money, the more I was willing to give away to people, especially men, so that they wouldn't leave me. And I got to a point in my recovery where I had so much compassion for this younger version of myself that was so alone or felt so isolated that she would have settled for almost anything to not have a man leave her, or not have people leave her, or have her friends abandon her. I almost would have done almost anything to make sure that I held on to the grains of sand that were the relationships that showed up for a while, than to lose it. And I want anybody out there, I've coached plenty of men who have been abused by women and who have been coerced into taking care of them in amazing ways, whether it's cars or it's rent or it's jewelry or it's, groceries or whatever. And the same is true for women. So women who feel unworthy, they tolerate a lot of stuff, right? They tolerate being told that there's something wrong with them, and they tolerate being cheated on. They tolerate being told that they're the reason that their lover is having an affair. They tolerate being, wedged against their children or their mothers or fathers or people support systems. They tolerate it because the wound, there's so much shame there, and this romantic interest is speaking to that frightened little girl and little boy inside of us that is terrified to lose the little bit of what they're suddenly experiencing, right? We're terrified. And so this video is hopefully helping you feel a little bit more understood. And because I know for my own sake, what helped me heal was understanding why I did what I did. And when I understood that, I was addicted to these dysfunctional relationships because I was so lonely, because I had felt so pushed away and abandoned by my own tribe, right? And I think that is where a lot of addiction stems from, is this disconnect from our tribe or society. And I think that's why if we're going to heal gang violence, if we're going to heal gangs, if we're going to get rid of gangs, then we have to speak to the isolation that these children feel before they join a gang. We have to get back to the sense of community. We have to get back to helping one another feel seen and feel loved. So it's important that anybody out there who feels like they love too much or have loved too much, and your relationship is off balance and you've attracted a male or a female into your life that is constantly taking and doesn't really, it's not reciprocal. They just take, and then they berate you for not giving them more. If you're in that type of a situation, you're not alone. But just know that that's coming from it's a place that's full of shame. It's a place inside of you that doesn't feel good enough. And unfortunately, you've attracted someone into your life that is completely comfortable with exploiting that pain. It's important that people who come from this place where I'm not enough know that it's not your fault, that is a deep, deep wound. I think it's the wound that stems, and gives birth to all sorts of addictions. I think it is the wound that is at the root core of so many addictions, eating disorders, drug addiction, chemical addictions, you name it. It is at the core of codependency. It's at the core of even narcissism. And it's important that we recognize that it's not our fault that we have this deep, deep fear, and that we are willing to give money up in exchange for someone to stay with us. It's because we honestly do not think that we're worthy. Our brain does not believe that we're worthy, and our brain does not think that anybody should be with us for us. So when we're in relationships with other people, we're naturally giving, whether it's money or our time, we're babysitting, we're picking up the medication at the drugstore, dropping it off 12 miles out of our way. We're saying yes when we mean no. And it's rooted in this paradigm that needs to be dissolved, that is rooted in a sense of abandonment, alienation, and feeling not enough. And our brain is trying to reconcile why this person is in our life. So our brains come up with innumerable ways to make sense of why someone's with us. So, we have lunch together and I have to pay for lunch, or, you are sick and I have to make you chicken soup, or, we had some type of an interaction and I have to put gas in your car. We had a conversation, or we had an argument and I have to sleep with you. You're mad at me and I have to make your bed. So at the core is our brain doesn't understand why people are in our life. And so we reconcile it by taking care of other people because we're not enough. So once I had that awareness, I began to have such self-compassion and self-empathy for the young woman that I was, and even the child that I was, that felt so unworthy and could not reconcile why anybody would even talk to her, that I had to do things for other people. I had to give them money, babysit, whatever, walk the dog, whatever it was, because I just didn't feel valuable and I didn't have enough. So I hope that this video inspires those of you out there who feel so unworthy that you come up with ways to exchange energy for why anybody spends any time with you. Know that that's coming from a pocket of pain, which I call a pop. It's a pocket of pain. Know that it's rooted in shame and that shame is not your fault. And know that the greatest ill that can fall upon a man or a woman is to feel separate from others and to feel responsible for that separation, because it absolutely goes against what it is to be a human being. Human beings are meant to connect and to flourish within a community of people. And we do best when we are allowed to feel accepted and loved and nurtured by a community of people. And so it's not your fault if that shame is there. And it's not your fault if you feel like you have to constantly give in order to receive. You are worthy and you are enough. And the more you heal that space inside of you, the more you learn to love yourself, then the more you will attract people into your life that see you and love you for who you are. But the change has to happen on the inside. We have to stop giving in order to receive. If you want to give, you give from your heart, but you're not giving from a place of lack. Give from a place of love. Give from a place of abundance. Give because you want to sow a karmic seed of abundance, but don't give because you are coming from a place of lack and you don't feel worthy, and this is how you balance the score, So don't give from that place. You're better off not giving from that place, because when you do, all you're doing is recreating that paradigm. And to heal that paradigm, you have to make a change. So if you do nothing else after you listen to this talk, at least end the pattern and begin to hold on to yourself. And rather than give to other people because you feel unworthy, take that energy and give it to the self. Give it to the inner child that's been so wounded that she can't figure out, or he can't figure out, why anybody would be with them. Speak to that inner child from a higher state of awareness and help that inner child know and believe that they are enough. If we can do this, if we can heal ourselves, we can help heal the world of a lot of this dysfunction. And without codependence, there would be no narcissist, because a narcissist has no tolerance for another narcissist. So, and if we can heal our codependency, then in future generations, we won't have people who have been so wounded in childhood that they develop narcissistic traits in the first place. So I hope this video has inspired you to love yourself. Namaste. Until next time, as I bow to the love and the light that is absolutely in you. Bye for now.